You know, the kindness that you have, and you were very easily wounded. Friendship seems incredibly important to you, particularly your friendships with men.
Oh, well, I hadn't thought of it like that, but well, it's true. Of course, the part of the problem was that in the period when I was a parliamentarian, the Commonwealth Parliament and the State Parliament was overwhelmingly male, which was terrible. And one of the things I can say that I was always very passionate about was trying to promote the whole idea of affirmative action, and I was national president when we set up the quota system to make sure that at least 1/3 of the members of Parliament were female. But it's astonishing, you see, that we didn't have a Victorian Labor Party federal member from this state till 1974. Incredibly late. And then she lost her seat in 1975, and I think it was probably not until 1980 that we had one more woman elected. So the result is that in the professions that I was involved in, it's true that the associations tended to be overwhelmingly male. I was part of this group in Victoria, which was a reform movement inside the Labor Party at a time when the Labor Party was run by the very, very hard doctrinaire left. And this group, which was called the Participants, and the participants were, the overwhelming majority of them were male, and they were professionals, and they included people like, for example, Dick McGarvey, who used to be the governor of Victoria, and John Cain, and the late John Button, and Frank Costigan, the QC, who died a few months ago. I think I mentioned Michael Duffy, Jim Kennan, who was Deputy Premier of Victoria. But you see, what they had, what was characteristic was they were overwhelmingly male. They're overwhelmingly male, and that was the way in which the system really operated.
Have there been any women in your life who've made big intellectual or creative impacts?
Yes, indeed.
Who? Apart from me.
Well, you're very important, but one of the things that they know who they are. I mean, one of the things that that there have been a few wounds in my inner life, and I've really pursued an approach of really not talking about the private life. I mean, that's been one of the criticisms.
I'm not talking about private. I'm talking about creative and intellectual impact. The people that, you've been so shaped by the men and the knowledge that they've had and the knowledge that you've gained from there, and where that sent you off. And I'm wondering, are there any women that you have, I mean, apart from, your mum and your aunt and your grandmother early on, and they were quite pivotal in shaping you?
Well, but I'd put them in the category of being encouragers. They were encouragers.
Not inspirers.
I'm not sure that they actually said, look, here's a whole body of information that is going to really transform your life. And I was so conscious that I suppose when I think of my period at school, that there must have been teachers who had an influence and so on. But I mean, just to give another example, if you take the University of Melbourne, it was so late before the University of Melbourne had even one female professor.
Yeah.
It's such a late process. So the result is that I'd say that...
Growing up in this kind of sea of men, did you see that as odd, or was it so normalised to you? Did you think, where are the women?
I think, one of the odd experiences about being a child during World War II, which was the one after World War I, but in World War II was that you could see that the teachers who were active and vigorous and lively and so on tended to be off in the war. And what then happened was that you had elderly retired ladies who were brought in and who were really past their use-by date, and they, which is sad, but it was, and they taught. And then, you see, you had that feeling that in 1945, 46, the teachers came back from the war, and that was really a restoration of normality. I mean, I think to a very large extent. I mean, I'd have to say that I was very much shaped by those, immediate wartime and post-war experiences about what was normative and what wasn't normative. But I always had that sense that I recognised that there was a terrible injustice done to women. I really always...
When? How old were you?
Oh, I was always concerned that...
because your father really ate with you. You were, it was fairly dysfunctional.
Well, it was. I think, a very dysfunctional
and
family.
So when did you realise there was an injustice done to women?
I think it was more the recognition of how. I think I must have overheard some teachers talking, but I was conscious of how the teachers, no matter how good they were underpaid relative to the way in which the men were paid, and that the prospects of promotion. I think the prospects for promotion were
so it was the teachers.
I think it's probably the teachers more than anything else.
Your grandmother was abandoned. Your mother, was emotionally abandoned, definitely.
Yes.
But it was the teachers. It was the teachers being paid less and not being recognised. That was where you saw the injustice done to women.
I think that was really quite. But I was also conscious, you see, that there were no women. You see, there were no women jurors at that stage, and I
didn't even know that.
There were no women
Isn't that
jurors.
terrifying?
Well, can you work out what the reason was? They said we'd have to have separate lavatories for them.
Of course.
And so it was the dunny excuse, you see, as to why you couldn't have women on juries. And naturally, you had very few women. You'd have somebody like Joan Rosenove, QC, or something like. And she, in a sense, was looked at as, say, look, we are progressive. We've got a single senior woman counsel.
But that still happens now. It does. They kind of go, look at our parliament, we've got 30% women and 70% men. It's even. Look at this panel, we've got 2 women and we've got 6 men. That's even. It's not, and it's not good enough. Look at 774 ABC on any 24-hour clock. There's only 3 hours which are anchored by a woman, and that's Lindy Burns. And that's it. Now, how that's been able to happen, and just suddenly I mention it, and people go, oh, wow, I've only just seen that. How is that possible for us to have been the frog in the boiling water for so long, for me to just kind of be the person saying the Emperor's not wearing any clothes, they're going, oh, golly. It's not good enough. 70-30 is not good enough. 2 women on a panel to every 8 men. It's not good enough.
Well, I'm very conscious that, that in the period when I was Minister for Science, there were a lot of boards like CSIRO and so on, a lot of board and what was then the Australian Research Grant Scheme. But when you were looking around for what you might describe as women of field rank, or women who'd had a fair amount of experience in the area, they were so few in numbers. I mean, because they were victims of the...
Exactly.
They were so few in numbers. You could have appointed the same women 20 times.
Right.
And you'd say, look, couldn't you go on another board for me? And they'd say, no, I'm already on 6, and that's, that's enough.
Yeah.
Oh no, it was really very shameful.
And things have started to move. Now I just want to talk, because there's a few other things I want to talk about. We talked about, it was very clear to me that you'd been emotionally wounded several times in your life, and one of the things was your mother kind of going and coming back. But what came up later was men, like it was strong male figures. Now you were talking about where you deal with that. Now music is a huge place for you to deal with your emotions.
Yes.
And you're a big sook. You have been known to burst into tears.
I'm a great weeper at concerts.
So, yeah, you are.
And I could, sometimes feel I could break the drought.
I just think that is so adorable.
Well, I mean, I really am looking for transcendental experience, and you find that transcendental experience in, say, in the music of Bach. And I remember, just a few months ago, there's a wonderful concert down at the Elizabeth Murdoch concert hall when Gidon Kramer, the great Latvian violinist, was here, and he was doing the Bach Chaconne from the Partita No. 2, and see, that's a solo work that lasts for 15 or 16 minutes, and it's been recorded very often. It's a fiendishly difficult piece. Well, I think undoubtedly the most difficult single piece in the whole repertoire. And but when Kramer played it, and because he's got a silky smooth technique, I thought it might be a silky smooth performance, and it wasn't. It was a kind of very dangerous, very high risk, and you thought, my God, maybe he's going to go off the rails. It was so thrilling and so compelling, and I couldn't really help myself. It was a great intellectual challenge, but it was a great emotional experience as well. Very cathartic.
Do you think of music as a safe place to express your emotions?
I don't know about being a safe place. I see it as being a kind of dangerous way, because if you really...
you use that word danger in music a lot. That's linked a lot in that chapter about your mind.
Well, I think it's true. Sometimes I think of putting on, perhaps one of the Mahler symphonies, and I think...
I want to go there?
I think maybe I'm not strong enough.
Yeah.
But, when I think of, say, the Mahler Ninth Symphony, there've been a couple of occasions when I've been going over to put it on the CD, and I think, maybe I'm not strong enough.
Because it just churns too much?
Because it'll get to me. It'll go.
And what will happen?
Well, I might just dissolve and finish up as a puddle on the floor.
But you know, you always come back.
Well, but it's, and you see that there are some works that have that overwhelming impact. I was sort of amused by something that Marta Argerich, this wonderful Argentinian pianist, probably the greatest pianist playing in the world now, and she was being interviewed. It's a wonderful DVD about her playing, and she was talking about the recordings that she's been doing of the Beethoven piano concertos, and she said she's never played number 4, and they said, why have you never played number 4? She said, I'm scared of it. It could go wrong, and I couldn't bear that. So
is music for you somewhere you escape into, or you go into to escape out of?
Well, I don't know that I'd altogether call it an escape. It's like where it's...
But it sounds like you talk about it being trapped. Like, I don't want to go into that place because I might be trapped, and that might force me to go into a place I don't want to go into.
No, it might force me to recognize, to really recognise things in myself that I don't particularly want to
do right now.
But it's really opening the secret door. There's a recurrent theme in a lot of English writing in particular, and you see it particularly for people who were educated at Oxford. You've got a pretty plain-looking door, and you go in through the door, and you go away from the fumes of the trucks going along the streets in Oxford. You go inside, and suddenly you're in a magic landscape. You're in an absolutely, totally different landscape, and you can see that in a way that going to one of these great symphonic works, and you open the door and you go in, and you might find yourself in an enormous cathedral that you didn't recognise before. Or you might be in a mosque like the Mezquita at Cordoba. But what you're going to find yourself in an enormous arena, something that's so wonderful and so challenging that's really beyond your previous experience.
Now, I want to move on, because you wanted to talk to me about some things too.
Yep.
But I wanted to ask you...
Well, I had about 54 questions I wanted to ask you.
What I wanted to ask you is, you're 77. There's been a lot of...
76.
76, sorry. There's been a lot of...
77 at the end of the year.
When's your birthday?
October the 11th. Same as.
So you're a Libran.
Same as Eleanor Roosevelt.
And he believes in God, but we're not going to go there because we'll just end up arguing. But what I wanted to say is, you're 77 years old. One of the saddest things... 76.
Got to get it
I'm
right.
just going to do this to give him the shit. So you're 77 years old.
76. I insist.
But one of the saddest things about getting old, I understand, is watching your friends die. And there's been people that you've lost around you. Who do you miss?
Well, I mean, I've become apprehensive about opening the obituary column in the Age. There were, on one occasion, there were 6 people that I knew reasonably well who were there in the same day. Who were
they?
Oh, they're not necessarily names.
They're just people that you...
But they were people who I'd had professional contact with, who'd been lawyers, who'd been part of the participants, the group that I was talking to about before. I'm thinking about, the people, when they pass, and there's a couple of people in my life that have passed, and I go to pick up the phone, I go, I can't wait to tell them, and then I go, they're not here anymore. Yep.
That's who I'm talking about. Who do you miss?
Well, I don't particularly want a particular. I'm not.
So there's not, but there are.
I'm not sure.
I just thought there was. I mean, the amount of conversations and the intellectual rigour and the discussions that you've had, and the huge impact that the other intellects around you have made on your life. I would imagine that these people would kind of leave, and there would be a hole. There would be a kind of a craving or a deprivation to want to contact with these people, but maybe your life and your intellect is so full that there's so many other things that you want to do, and so many other people that you want to talk to, and so many other books you want to read, and questions you want to ask, and questions you want to answer.
It makes you sound a bit heartless, but I think there's
not at all.
No, I think there's an element of truth in that. I can see that often there have been people who've had an important mentoring influence, but then I've moved along in some area, and in some way their role has really changed, and maybe instead of me having a profound input from them, you get to that stage that I'm providing an input for them. Okay. And so on, so that I'm conscious of that kind of transition.
All right. Well, do me, Barry.
Well, I think you write. I think you write wonderfully well. I think you can be. You are often absolutely hysterically funny, and I think the most recent. I loved if you haven't already bought the book, Save When, the latest collection of essays.
Off there for sale.
You've got to read. Particularly, I think, for example, can I just read a little bit?
Yeah, I will get very embarrassed. But
just turn away. But she's got this wonderful little passage, which is a letter. Which is an election letter from Mrs. Jeanette Howard to the electors of Deveny.
And Barry said, I got it right. And he'd know.
It said, this is the format of the letter. Dear Mrs. Insert husband's surname here. Let me introduce myself. My name is Mrs. John Howard, or as my husband calls me, Mother. I'd like to tell you about the man I've been sleeping in a single bed next to for more than 30 years. Contrary to common belief, he's not old-fashioned. His favourite band is the Seekers. And he once had a conversation with a woman whose daughter had a child out of wedlock. And he's not racist. We have many friends from overseas. Well, 2. George Bush and his wife, Mrs. Bush. Even though they talk funny and don't know who Don Bradman is, we treat them just like normal people. Despite my supportive wordless wife routine, let me assure you, I'm the one who wears the fawn slacks around here. We've never disagreed on anything, because if we did, things might become unpleasant. And we couldn't have that. Your husband should tell you to vote for my husband. If he hasn't already, you're probably poor or foreign. Yours forever, cardigan clutching, Mrs. Howard. I do think that's very smart. But look, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and
once, but I was drunk, but I enjoyed it.
No, we started talking, and then we said, "Oh no, this is bad. If we start talking all the good, we'll use up all the good stuff."
But it's all good stuff with us.
But why? The incredible thing is we've actually this is only the second time we've met.
I know.
I mean, we are old friends, but we've only met once before. Well, we did have one telephone conversation, or maybe two.
It was hot.
Well,
no, it was.
But look, no. What I was going to say was, you said about your background. You said we were Catholics. We weren't Christians. And so you were brought up. But I'm interested that you didn't go to a Catholic school. Why didn't you go to a Catholic school like people of perhaps of your generation?
It's a
get molested like everyone else. But
we weren't good enough to be molested. That's how poor we were. I know, it was awful. Really, it was horrible. There's a very good question. There's a very good answer for that. My mother went to Francis Teachers College with Max Keeley's, and back in the early '60s when they paid people to learn about. How to teach, and you had a little scholarship and stuff, and she went and she taught, and she ended up in the Catholic schools, like good Catholic girl ended up in the Catholic schools, and she didn't think they were very good educationally. She thought they were terrible, and she thought that the way that there were silly things like she wanted to use the radio to show, for the kids to listen to a Radio National thing, and Mother Superior always had the radio and they didn't use it. There were these things like they didn't flush the toilets during the day, and the grade sixes all flushed them after lunchtime and stuff. And my mother had, there was all these kind of cost-cutting measures, and my mother is probably more like me than I choose to admit. She basically said, well, Elizabeth is my eldest sister, and said, Elizabeth's very much like you, actually. She's very clever, and she's got great kind of capacity to understand and inseminate and disseminate information, and said she wasn't happy, and so she left teaching there, and she said, because the worst thing that you can say if you're in the Catholic system is, I'm sending the kids to the state school. She just thought the education was better there, and I don't think my father had much to say because he was a wimp. So, But
a Catholic wimp.
He was a Catholic wimp, yeah, he was a Catholic wimp. So we went to the state schools. I think my mother just thought it was a better education. I actually think that she was correct too.
Yeah.
So off we went to, off to the ghetto.
Now, you studied arts at La Trobe University.
Correct.
But you don't say, for example, what were the great was it history? Was it literature? Was it what was your great
when I was about 16, there was a friend of the family who said, "When you don't know, I've never been terribly academic. I'm not academic and I'm not intellectual. I'm not sure what I am, but I've never been. That's not been my passion. I think that my passion is people." And that's what it is. But somebody said to me, when you don't know what to study, just choose the subject you like, and choose the subjects you like, and your life will go from there. And I think that that's true, because there was that, once when you had to go to Melbourne University, you had to have maths or a language, and it was at that point where I kind of go, well, I can't possibly do either. So what do I do? And he said, just choose the subject you like. So I studied cinema studies and drama, which I've got a double major in. So basically, it's not really a degree. Yeah, it's just basically, I don't know, a piece of paper from La Trobe. Yeah, so that's what I studied, but I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the psychological aspects of, of looking at all those things, and that's what kind of interests me. That's what always interests me, is actually not the narrative but the truth, and what goes on underneath the bonnet in everything, whether it's art, politics, history, relationships, gender, sexuality,
Well, you see, but you write wonderfully and you've got tremendous sense of style. Who've been your influences intellectually? I mean, for example, who are the great novelists to you? Who are the people that what are the novels that you return to?
I'm not a great reader of fiction. I'm a reader of non-fiction. I read manuals. I love reading manuals. I read, but like manuals about whether it's the science of happiness, the way the brain changes itself. I like self-help books too. And, you kind of look at those and look at the people like Alice Miller have been huge. I think that my biggest influence have been Bill Hicks, who's a comedian, Billy Bragg, who is a kind of fairly rebellious and prolific songwriter, Alice Miller, who's a psychoanalyst, and
Norman Doidge.
Norman Doidge, I'm going to see him on Tuesday night.
Is that right?
Yeah, The Brain That Changes Itself. I'm fascinated by the neuroplasticity and all that kind of stuff. I'm just interested in what's under the bonnet. So, no, I'm not. And I try to read more fiction, but it just doesn't grab me. I want real life.
Well, you do get real life in fiction, believe it or not.
I do, but there's just too... I don't know, there's too much between. I didn't like cartoons as a child. I didn't kind of get them. I wanted kind of... I think one of the books that I read growing up that made the biggest impact on me was The Red Balloon. Do you remember that book?
Yeah.
And with the black and white pictures? Because I would look at pictures on the television of overseas and stuff, and I didn't kind of really realise that there was a place there. I just kind of thought they were pictures. And you'd open up books and there'd be cartoons or there'd be watercolours or there'd be pictures. But actually to look into this world of this child walking the streets of Paris, and that's kind of where he lived and stuff, and I went, people live there, you know. But it was photographs that kind of took me there. So I don't know, I get a bit confused by stuff like cartoons and the Roadrunner and going, he dies, but he keeps coming back to life. And the Flintstones, they wear the same clothes all of the time. And I don't get that. And they don't have a fridge, they never go to the toilet. You know, it was just like, I just want real life.
But what about poetry? I mean, do you read poetry?
No, but one of my good friends is Chris Wallace-Crabbe,
yes,
who I adore, and I read his. Yeah. But that's basically... I like E.E. Cummings, but yes. I'm not, you know... If we're going into culture, you know, I'm just, you know, I'm in the shallow end of the gene pool there. I really like accessible culture. I like things like postcards and street art and graffiti, and they're the things that really touch me. As I'm going for a run in the morning and I'll see a kind of a poster on the side of a telephone pole, or I'll see a word that kind of jumps out at me. It's those things that I jump off on, and then when I least expect them, you know, I just don't expect them. Or something my kids will say, you know. They're not wrestling dolls, they're action figures. I think that's probably enough. We're going to be around to hang around. I'd like to thank you very much on behalf of Mark Roubeau, Joanne Baker, producer O'Donnell, Readings, and the North Fitzroy Star. And I'd particularly like to thank Barry Jones.